Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first ever episode of Vivre with myself, Michael Oden from Nine Realms Publishing, and my good friend Aldous. Go ahead, Aldous. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, good evening, Odin, and thank you so much for allowing me to join you for what promises to be a fantastic discussion series, or maybe just a single episode, depending on how things go, on Napoleon, far and away the greatest military commander of the 18th and 19th centuries, let alone the high watermark for French influence on mainland Europe. For those that don't know me, I'm the faceless voice behind the curtain of the moniker of Aldous on the Farm, just off Orwell Lane. And while I do firmly agree with the tyrannical comic writer Alan Moore that every legend needs an appropriate ending, tonight I believe we will simply be discussing this particular legend's beginnings and how considerably
100%.
humble they are, considering the importance of what would become.
And I think that's something that you and I talked a little bit about, brushed up on a little before the show, is when you look at these historical figures of import, right? Alexander the Great, Hannibal Barca, Julius Caesar, all of these guys come from a background that kind of lay the framework for them. You know, Alexander the Great, his father, Philip II of Macedon, had completely reformed the Macedonian military and had politically maneuvered the country to be the hegemonic power of Greece. Freaking Julius Caesar, his granduncle was Marius, the man who reformed the Roman legion, and he himself allegedly hailed from divine origins from Aphrodite, who was one of the or Venus, who was one of the patron goddesses of the city of Rome. So he obviously had a very big sphere of influence of his own as he came up. And then, Hannibal Barca, again, his father was the man that kind of pushed the Carthaginian war effort during the First Punic Wars on Sicily, waging a very successful guerrilla war campaign against the Romans in Sicily. So all of these guys come from these very immense pedigrees where you'd expect them to be what they are. And for Napoleon, that's really not the case. He comes from this pretty much middle class family. They're low gentry on the Italian court in Corsica, and his father was initially part of the Corsican nationalist movement that was opposing the French rule of Corsica. But when it becomes pretty clear that France is going to take Corsica, whether they like it or not, he turncoats, which is something that will be a bit of build a lot of resentment between Napoleon and his father. But yeah, so he comes up in this kind of lower gentry class, and he finds himself, he goes to the military school in Paris, in France. I believe he goes to Sancerre. Is that correct, Aldous?
Yep, I believe so.
Which is the premier military academy. But at this point in time, merit counts for little to nothing. It's all about how much money and who you know that you have in your pocket, pretty much. And Napoleon doesn't have anything, so he's kind of getting these shitty assignments. And then a little something happens in the 1780s in France to kind of shake things up.
Well, I think even before that, it's interesting to note that he was first appointed to the artillery. And you'll see a lot of mixed writings on this. There'll be some people that dismiss it because, the artillery was prestigious. And part of the reason they're saying that is because in the 1760s, Grimbauval is reorganizing the entire French artillery. He's standardizing carriages. He's standardizing powder sizes on what constitutes a heavy gun, what constitutes a heavy battery, what constitutes a medium battery, what constitutes a light battery, what is a horse gun, what is not a horse gun. A horse gun it has a dedicated gun for both the gun and the limber. A
Yeah,
normal battery will just have a single team of horses for both the battery and the gun. The difference between the two, one is extremely more mobile. In terms of Napoleonic warfare, our horse gun is essentially a mobile tank, for lack of a better word, whereas artillery, standard artillery, is just standard artillery. So French artillery is being completely reorganized in the 1760s and 1770s, and it was actually, I will argue, it's not the case that it was a prestigious posting. In
I
order
would
to
agree.
be an artillery officer, you have to know things, and knowing things is never anything that in any monarchical society, higher upper crust are renowned for appreciating. If you look even at North America, probably like great men. And while I disagree with all of his politics, here in America, in our history, Alexander Hamilton rose from being a poor bastard through the artillery ranks up to the position that he was in. Again, if you're a smart person and you've got a little bit of schooling, you can excel in artillery because all of artillery is knowledge on what is a battery operating on, and then it's math on locating and directing fire accurately. So
Yeah.
Napoleon early on shows himself to have a very acute mind.
Well, 100%. And I would absolutely back up your claim that it's not the prestigious post. We have to remember that this is a point in time where the aristocracy still governs the mindset of the nobility, and when it comes down to the aristocratic mindset, there is nothing better as an officer than to get glory. The post of prestige would easily be cavalry. Like this is a period of time where the cavalry charge is still one of the more like a game changer on the field of battle, and it's really going to be Napoleon who turns, like, cavalry is still obviously very important, but Napoleon's going to be that commander that really brings forward the artillery and makes them the show stealer as he goes on. And when it comes down to, he gets it, as Aldous mentioned, he gets his initial commission in the artillery, and he excels there. He's doing very well, and then the French Revolution happens, and this is something that's actually really interesting for Napoleon, because Napoleon, uh, he's always kind of struggled as a young man. He very much struggled with his identity between uh, being a Corsican and an Italian and being in the French military. And so he actually goes and he does some traveling back and forth between Italy and specifically Corsica uh, and the French mainland, where he's trying to make connection with the leader of the Corsican nationalist movement to try and get them to join in and be a part of, like, effectively buy into the French Revolution. And he gets the cold shoulder because his father betrayed uh, the Corsican nationalist movement, and this was a very embittering experience for Napoleon. And so it kind of, like, that series of events leads to him writing a pamphlet um, that was pro-revolutionary, that caught the eyes of one Augustin Robespierre, who is the younger brother of Maximilian Robespierre, who at this point in time, I believe, Aldous, date check this on me, is his publication of this pamphlet's around 1793, right?
I believe so. It
Um,
was it's right before the siege of Toulon. It's earlier in
yeah,
that year. But before that, I mean, you've got he returns to Corsica in the 1780s multiple times, trying to, and I can never remember the leader of the Corsican independence movement's name because realistically, he's not important.
yeah, like
But what it is he interacts with him multiple times. It's Napoleon. He's trying to find meaning, and he's trying to get involved in the independence movement. But because of his father's collaboration with the French when they first came in, he's denied repeatedly. So he returns to France and he's looking again for something. And it's one of those things where the man who has all of the tools falls at the exact right time that everything's aligned, and it's the French Revolution, and it's massive social upheaval. So now, as not a member of the high aristocracy, but well educated and smart and tools of his own being, he's able to move up in the ranks in accordance with the opportunities as they present themselves.
Absolutely. And it's because of that position that he is in, that, and having just written the this pamphlet that has gotten the notice of the Robespierres, that he is able to get his first major assignment in command of in command of forces at the siege of Toulon. And Toulon is kind of where the Napoleonic legend begins in terms of his military success. Toulon was a very impressive siege, and he really distinguishes himself in it. But very shortly after the siege of Toulon, the Robespierres die. Augustin commits suicide, and Maximilian is executed by guillotine. And this puts Napoleon in a bit of a precarious position, and he is in Paris at this point in time, and he gets arrested for a few days for potentially being a Jacobin conspirator and a Robespierre apologist. And so he's held in prison, and all of the merit and everything that he had done, that he had built up in the siege of Toulon, and all of the position that he had finally gotten himself to, was completely wiped away. And
sure.
He had to effectively start from nothing again.
The reset button was essentially pressed on his influence and notoriety within the realms that he wanted it to have influence and notoriety in. It's interesting to note, though, as well, that throughout the revolution, there are multiple times when, prior to its takeover by the Spanish and other Italian influences in Toulon, Napoleon goes back and forth to Toulon at times because he's Corsican. He has free reign. He can go back there. So as things get hot in Paris, he'll go back and forth for protection. Because at the time of the revolution, right up to the time that the Robespierres are killed, it's constantly in flux as to who's in power. And Napoleon's savvy enough that he doesn't attach himself to anybody directly. He's loose. Yeah. He's got loose associations. But throughout this period, you have people that will rise up from captain to major, and then 2 weeks later they're dead. Because they're aligning themselves with who they think is a strong faction, and then Tuesday happens and that faction's all dead. So he's savvy enough to read the room, and he's in and out of Paris, and he knows Toulon very well. So when he's put in charge of that siege, not only does he know the city, he knows the geography, and it's the first time that you see him execute not just his maneuvering and exploitation of geography, but his excellent understanding of combined arms. And you see the fluidity of what he envisions and what will become French maneuverability as far as infantry tactics, and the speed at which he can deploy and maneuver.
Absolutely, and that's a great sum up. Before we go any further, though, we do have some people that have joined us in the chat, so let's say hi to them. I know very much earlier in the evening, we had Crowfire Studios stop by to plant the flag of being first, and he asked both of us if we had watched The Duelist. I have not watched the full movie, but I have seen a bunch of clips. It is on my list. I know that Aldous has seen it because he responded. And we have Michael Briers has joined us in the chat. Thanks so much. Dean James came in here to taunt us for 5 seconds, and we are joined now by Arrogant Ape, who is letting us know why Bonaparte, well, you can bone together. I'm ready to learn.
We're talking about the French here, man. They don't do anything like that. It's always by group.
Of course. For a guy who hated the guillotine so much, he sure loved the guillotine. That is, until he hated it again. That is a very fair summation of Maximilian Robespierre. but like, and you speaking to that whole thing where Napoleon's, very acute at reading the room, as it were, and he knows when to duck out of Paris. A very big part of that is Robespierre, by midway through 1793, is just handing pink slips out to everyone. Uh, the the courthouse in France has been converted to being able to try 60 people at once, and the ability for somebody to defend themselves is pretty limited, and this could be the result of you actually being involved in a revolutionary plot to saying something not quite so nice about a person in the Committee of Public Safety within earshot, and now you're up on deck for execution. So
But
Robes,
I do think it's important to state, though, that the benefit of that is it clears the table of all of the high aristocracy people that are standing in the way of anybody with talent and ability from rising up. And what you see,
100%, and that does allow for the rise of Napoleon. I do think that was mostly covered in the purge of the 78 Girondists at the very beginning. And like there's a reason why Robespierre falls out of favor, is because he goes too damn far, and is accusing people that have no right of being accused. And it literally comes down. I mean, you have Georges Danton, who puts out a political cartoon that criticizes Robespierre, and he gets executed for it. So it does very much become a thing where it doesn't matter if you're this guy's friend. One day you could be welcome at his table. The next day you could be under the blade. But you are absolutely right. This does allow for the scenario for Napoleon to rise, and especially since France is in a war against Austria and the majority of its military infrastructure is in shambles. And they're having some pretty serious difficulties handling this war. It is the perfect lightning in a bottle moment for a person to really accomplish this underdog story, and that's what Napoleon does. Now, as we said, he gets arrested shortly after the siege of Toulon, while he's in Paris after the Robespierres get the chopping block themselves. But he ends up kind of accidentally stumbling onto the thing that will define much of what will give him the campaign that really defines his career. The director of the current government at this point in time is the Directory, and they're not particularly good at their job.
that's an understatement.
Say what you will about the Robespierres and the Committee of Public Safety, they were efficient.
But the mail got there on time,
Exactly. And so the Sans-Culottes are not happy, and they are about
literally nobody's happy. I mean,
nobody's
following the Robespierre's execution, the French government falls into absolute total chaos. It's
exactly.
Even beyond anything up to this point, you got to understand, as far as the people are concerned during this period of time, throughout the Troubles, like life's okay. It's better than it's been. Bread prices are now outrageous. Corn yields or wheat yields and everything's coming in. Market's still working. It's the upper crust, the quote unquote intelligentsia, that's being slaughtered at the guillotine. It's not normal people.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that leads into this. Is there was a lot of resistance to there was a lot of suggestions for changes, because the French military needed to be updated as of 1760. And you had a lot of brilliant men that were making really good suggestions. Like I briefly mentioned Grimbalville as a reference of somebody that reestablished the artillery, but you you don't see any of the suggestions for the infantry or the cavalry reorganization. And one of them in particular is the corps system, which is breaking armies down into divisionary systems under corps commanders to increase mobility. And it's done by junior officers that are then gate kept essentially by senior members. The benefit of the terror is those senior officers are dead; they're gone.
Yeah.
So it's not just a revolution of leadership. It's not just a revolution of culture. It's an entire revolution within months of military thinking. Out with the old, in with the new, literally with their heads gone. There is nobody left that wants to do anything the way it was done before. So everything's being changed. It's a massive revolution at every scale of French society. And then the Directory steps in and like throws a monkey wrench into the works that things have been moving, and then everything starts grinding to a halt and chaos reigns.
100%. It's an organization that's rife with corruption. There's not a lot of forward momentum on any legislation. Everything's just kind of stalled. And so the people of France are getting uppity, and the sans-culottes, which has been kind of the pendulum of the revolution up through this point, is whenever you have a major event happens, it's kind of spearheaded by the sans-culottes. They begin to march on the Directory, and Napoleon sees an opportunity because he's really the only guy with a commission in Paris. And so he takes command of the National Guard units, and he saves the Directory's ass, because as these peasants are coming up the streets of Paris to the building where the Directory are, Napoleon has his National Guard units ready to go, and he's got 2 cannon with a crossfire section in the streets, and he's loaded them with grapeshot. Now, at this period of time, cannon has a few different types of rounds. You have your main ball shot, which is an artillery round for like far range and for heavy hitting. But grapeshot is for almost like kind of crowd control. Imagine like a massive shotgun blast.
Well, and to explain what grapeshot is, it's a piece of wood that's the exact diameter of the barrel, with a metal spring that wraps around it to another piece of wood. And inside that coiled spring, which with capped on each ends, is anywhere between 12 to 15, basically really big round balls that are about 1 inch in diameter. And so as it goes down the barrel, and these cannons are smoothbore, so it's the most apropos is it's buckshot out of a cannon, because it's not rotating, because there's no rifling in there. So as soon as it hits the end, the wood's going to just shatter. You're going to have wood splinters flying. The metal coil will spring out and fly, and then you've got 12 to 15 1-inch metal balls that are flying out. And because it's not rifled, they will immediately start to separate. So you're talking just devastation on a scale that you honestly can't fathom with modern weaponry. It's insane what the devastation that this can do on a condensed group of flesh.
100%. And so, they've got that all set up, and he has the National Guard units give a few volleys of rifle fire. But between those few volleys of rifle fire and the cross sections of the grapeshot, the sans-culottes find they don't like being shot at, and they leave. And
it is also important to note, Napoleon had anybody that was wounded on the street was bayoneted. Like there was no excuse. He left. He did everything he needed to do to put down the revolt. It's not really a revolt. It's just an uprising of people that are pissed. But they're calling for dangerous things. They're calling for the monarchy back. They're calling for everything, because they want structure. They want order, because again, now we have chaos on their level. So they're pissed. So we shoot them with a whiff of grapeshot, and then we go through and we bayonet the dead. And that kind of seals it. We don't see any more problems.
No, and it's the last time that the sans-culotte plays a factor in the French Revolution. Like it is a key turning point, and Napoleon is the person that does it. Is the sans-culotte, as I said, by this point has been this pendulum that kind of decides moments in the revolution. Is that when the sans-culotte gets involved and they rise up and they put their mind to something, they usually get it done, and Napoleon stops them in their tracks, and they don't want any more of it. And that is the final moment. And this act of this deed buys Napoleon a lot of favor with the Directory, at least initially, until Italy happens and they decide he's too dangerous. But at this point in time, the Directory owes its skins to Napoleon Bonaparte, and this allows him some pretty incredible opportunity. We're actually going through this a lot quicker than I thought we would.
No. So we're in October of 1795 is when this happens, and by the end of 1795, he's placed in command of France's forces. Well, I use forces in the most loose term available.
Liberal of terms, because
he's put in charge of the French army that's in northern Italy. And what the French have been at war with the Austrians for a while now, because of course the Austrians are pissed because they just beheaded the sister of the King of Austria. So there's hostility there. Plus the French and the Austrians haven't gotten along for a very long time.
They have always hated each other.
So they're fighting over northern Italy. So Napoleon's put in charge of the French army of Italy. And army is even loose terms. You're talking roughly 25,000 to 30,000 men who are poorly trained, questionably supplied, and even more so questionably organized. On paper,
and they haven't been paid.
Yeah. On paper, on paper, the army is over 45,000 strong. Most historians will, if you're generous, you'll give him 30,000 men. If you're not, if you're realistic, you're saying he probably had around 20 to 25,000 that were ready in any way, shape, or form to fight. And that means have a gun, have a uniform, have a pack, have the ability to march. What he's left with is a disaster. And in less than a year and a half, he signs a peace treaty with Austria because he outmaneuvers Austria with a smaller force over and over and over again as he's slowly developing on his small army scale what will become the core model for the French military.
Absolutely. And to give us a break from the discussion, we have people in the chat that have joined. Mo Biggs obviously came in while we were still talking about the whiff of grapeshot. Ball shot is just plain disrespectful. I mean, that was the point. Be as disrespectful as Napoleon could be. Abe was saying that he saw you Y too short about grapeshot. Sounds frightening. I certainly would not like to be on the other end of that. I am fairly certain that would suck. Dean is still here. My goodness.
Hey, good to see Dean. I thought he bounced in, dropped the comment, and then bailed out.
I thought so too, because he bounced in and was just kind of like, let's make fun of these guys for a sec, and then I figured that he hightailed it out. Mo Biggs is asking where the academics are in the chat.
I'm here.
I don't know. Maybe you guys scared them off last time.
I have 2 published papers. I count as an academic, right?
That's fair. Oh man, they were just here, Mo, but they have a lot of graded papers to deliver before winter break eve is over. Oh goodness. But yeah, so the Italian campaign. Do we want to go into that, or do we want to
start on it? But I also think it's important to note that because we just hit 1796. Napoleon's in Italy. He's in charge of the French army. But if you jump back 4 years prior, in August of 1792, this is something that's very important to understand Napoleon's mindset later. is that he was present at the storming of the palace, where the
Yeah, the
palace was sacked
pillars.
and pillaged. The royal guard was massacred, and the royal family was forced to seek shelter with the assembly. That profoundly influenced him. He was borderline shocked by it. And
Yeah.
you will see, and this is a trend line that you'll see with Napoleon. Anytime there is massive violence against the French themselves, it stuns him. He has no issue. Like at Austerlitz, he certainly does not issue a quarter to the Austrians. At Borodino, he doesn't issue a quarter to the Russians. But anytime on the retreat from Moscow, or even at the end of the 100 days, you will see him try to do what he can to save French lives, and he will always do what he can to avoid the populace from rising up. And in that way, ironically, because he's eventually elected as emperor. And
I
you
was
can
about to say,
argue,
you need to put that election in a
right,
very large asterisk because
but the
like
people loved him.
the people did love him, but the election results was like a 100% turnout for the French population in favor of him as emperor, and the likelihood of that being a real election result back then is slim to not happening.
Well, I think we live in an age where we would be very careful to criticize elections of the past. I will say that,
That's fair.
but you have to understand. I mean, the people loved him, and part of the reason the
Okay.
people loved him is because he reestablished everything that the revolution was trying to do. He established the Napoleonic Code, and
It's still used to this day in a lot of places.
yeah, absolutely. And one of the that's why you see such an anti Franco outlook on Napoleon and France at this time from the British, because if you were to institute the Napoleonic Code in Britain at this time, it would completely disrupt and destroy their civilization. Everything relied upon you could be corrupt as long as you were high enough and it worked in your favor. If the court favor was in your opinion, then it didn't matter what you did. If you're a fan of Bernard Cornwell at all, and you've seen any of the Sharp series, you will see this time and time again, where Sharp, a man who was raised up against the ranks, arguably in the French manner, is forced to deal with these corrupt aristocrats.
Imbecilic.
Yeah, that are in positions where they have no rule for being, no reason or rule for being there. So arguably, the entire, it's ironic because one of the greatest British centric versions of the Napoleonic Wars in pop culture is the Sharp series, and yet Sharp's very character is in the very model of what the French army would do.
Yeah.
Being raising people up that show talent and ability through the ranks. And you see that time and time again. And that's something that Napoleon definitely opened the door for. And that's part of the reason why he is the greatest military land commander.
Speaking of raising talent from the ranks, Mo Biggs puts in quotations, "Dean is still here? My goodness, that would make an excellent pull quote for the Embrace 3 campaign. Thank you, Mo." I only interrupt because he was saying don't gatekeep that comment, Ogden.
Read the Embrace. What's that? What's the Embrace, Odin?
Oh my goodness. We'll talk about that later. Right now we're talking Napoleon.
Many hands make light work.
Yes, of course. Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. It is one of those ironic things, but that's one of the things. I think that one of the great things about Wellington was,
oh God, no, you're not allowed to praise Wellington at all. Wellington was a fool.
Wellington had an immense amount of respect for Bonaparte, and in fact, I believe Wellington genuinely admired him. And I think that's actually one of the things that the Sharp series does really well about Wellington is his constant consternation that Napoleon has all of these things in his military that he doesn't. He is surrounded by incompetent fops that come from, as he calls them, that come from the English courts and have bought their commissions, and they don't know what they're freaking doing. Napoleon has order and discipline over his men, and Wellesley has a lot of issues with that.
Here's all you need to know about Wellington. and we're off topic, but he said Scott was lost, man. On Scotch march to Mexico City, Scott is lost. Like that it sums up. He has no bearing of modern military mobility. He has no understanding of modern military strategic movement. He is stuck in a defensive mindset, and he's like a lot like Montgomery. He becomes a stalwart built upon a single fragile stone of one victory.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that, but I think that the fact that he was the defensive commander is what made him effective against Napoleon.
But he
Now,
wasn't effective against him. He barely won Waterloo, and that's only because Blucher showed up. And
yeah,
Blucher gets
that's fair.
no credit historically. I mean, nine out of 10 academics agree that Wellington won Waterloo all on his own. Never mind the fact the Germans showed up. We're just going to
Yeah, the
ignore that.
Germans, the Germans were really what turned the tide on the battle, because
Yeah,
if they hadn't shown up,
where's the Young Guard at Waterloo? Oh wait, we're not going to talk about that. We just talked about them. Anyway, so back to 1790.
sorry, hold on. Arrogant Ape writes, "Whoa, does Aldous have some beef with Wellington?"
I do. He's a British commander.
You heard it here, folks. Aldous hates the British commanders.
No, okay. The British are the people that they. Oh man, time and time again they make inept decisions. It wasn't a bridge too far. It was inept planning.
Oh goodness, that is a great topic for another time. But as you said, going back to, you said 1794, right?
Yeah, 1794 to 1796. He's named directory. The directory named him the chief commander in chief of the Army dell'Italia, and dispatch him with orders to counter the Austrian influence in the northern Italian territories.
Yeah.
And by 1797, the Austrians are signing a treaty with him
Yeah.
at Camporfio in October. And that's 7 victories in 7 months against a larger army that he had absolutely no business kicking the shit out of. And he did every time he faced him.
100%. And the even more impressive thing is the directory sends 2 more seasoned, more accomplished commanders, 2 or 3, with much larger and better and actual armies, to the Austrian, like to fight the Austrians. I think in Prussia, right?
Yes. Yep. They're fighting in Germany at the time, as well as in what the Lorraine region is now. But
yeah, but that's supposed to be the actual main war effort against the Austrians. And the impressive thing about Napoleon is he does such a damn good job in Italy that the Austrians turn complete focus to deal with him, and Napoleon smokes him. We will save, because we haven't done we haven't pulled out. I haven't done my cursory research on the Italian to prep for that, because I wasn't expecting to go through this as fast. But the Italian campaign is really where Napoleon's myth begins.
He creates 2 newspapers at the time too, to make sure that everybody in France is aware of what he is accomplishing. And that's where the quote comes. And I do not know the original French. I just have it in my notes. And man, this is from back in college. But Bonaparte flies like lightning and strikes like thunder. He is everywhere and sees everything. He is sent by a great nation. And that's key, man. That last line, he is sent by a great nation. Napoleon is well aware of what it takes to rise, and he is all about self-publicity. But the thing is, his self-publicity, it's not aggrandizement. He's actually doing this.
He's doing it, and he's doing it well. And Napoleon is himself a very big fan of the classical period, and undoubtedly got a lot of those tactics from reading stuff like, Caesar was publishing his commentaries in Gaul to maintain the public opinion so that he could continue doing what he was doing. And so I I do not doubt that Napoleon's starting of these newspapers had a lot to do with knowing, like, if you have the minds of the people, if you let them know about your successes and you romanticize your deeds to them, they will carry you farther than anyone in public office can.
For sure. And one of the more interesting notes, and it's one of those things that's a footnote in history that like slowly ripples out, is there were Prussian observers with the Austrian army in northern Italy, and two of them were in direct correspondence with George Leopold von Rieswitz. And Rieswitz is really only notable because he creates what is arguably the greatest 19th century war college teaching tool, which is Kriegspiel, which becomes a cornerstone of the Prussian military school. And that's basically fighting fake battles on a sand table as a military commander, and then having cloud of war and trying to understand mobility and stuff as you're playing, you're wargaming, you're playing tabletop games in 1811. But the birth of that is first seen because these Prussian observers are talking with von Rieswitz, and they're saying the Austrians have no command and control capability for responding with the speed or mobility of their opponent. He is moving so fast, and he knows the geography so well that they can't respond accordingly, and that's why they keep on losing. And this is mind blowing to the Prussians because they've never seen armies move at the speed. To give you an example, the French military from 1760 to 1790 started changing their foot speed. They went from roughly 60 to 70 paces per minute to 120 paces per minute. It doesn't sound like much. It's only an increase.
That's a lot.
It's huge. This is no railroads. There's no transportation. Most of your army is not on horseback. The speed that the French were moving at is phenomenal. You're a 30% increase over what any other comparable army can move at. And so they're able to cover an extra 1/3 of distance every day. So they're consistently outmaneuvering and outpacing the Austrians, which as the battles go on gets worse and worse and worse due to attrition. And also the Austrians were terrible at this time with their logistics. So they're not taking into account, they're thinking that everything's safe and this is the front line, and Napoleon's behind them before they even realize where he's at, and so they have to reposition. So they're constantly losing resources. It's just an expert. It's the modernization of the French military, and you're seeing it in real time from 1775 to 1797, or 1795 to 1797.
And those things become the cornerstones of Napoleon's maxims of war: is knowing your terrain, movement, command, and control. Those three things are really the cornerstones of his success on the battlefield. And they seem like no-brainers. But at this point in time, as Aldous was saying, is the contemporary forces were just not able to keep up with him. And that speed of Napoleon's is something that really bites everybody really hard for the majority of his existence, until they eventually learn that Napoleon's speed is just as much of a danger as it is a strength. Because the strategies that will be used most effectively against Napoleon will utilize his speed against him.
Well, you don't see it at this time either, but
no.
If you what you will see eventually, and you see the nascent form of it slowly developing, is there's a great account at I think it's Quatre Bras, which is in during the 100 Days.
Yeah.
But a British commander writes that who had never seen the French deploy on march before, and deploy on march means the British or any other continental army would march up to a position in road column, which means you're so many facings wide and very, very long. And then you would stop, and then you would form battle line at a stop. And then your companies would break out and your battalions would break out and form battle line in your brigade. The French could do that on move. In other words, they would be marching towards you and slowly fan out into battle line while they were marching. The discipline is astounding to military observers at the time. And this is after the Italy campaign, but it's not long after the Italy campaign that this starts becoming the standard French practice. The drill level of the French infantry was at another level. It's almost amazing when you talk about it, because you don't even, there are moments in the American Civil War in the 1860s that brigades can't even do that.
Yeah.
With semi-trained men, let alone no training. And what the British are primarily dealing with at this time is a very poorly trained, low morale force. Let alone the Austrians are the same way. Prussians and some of the German states have a little bit of a different argument, as do the
Because
Swiss.
they have their military arm has been the strength of their state since Frederick the Great.
Right. Frederick the Great establishes the Prussian military school, and much like the French, they are students of war at this time. You do have students of war occurring in Britain, but what hampers Britain is this aristocratic system that just is continually you can have, if you're familiar with the Charge of the Light Brigade, that's a classic example in British history of a highly trained, highly drilled unit that is put under the command of a totally inept person, and then the British just it's wasted. That would never happen under French command.
I mean, same thing happens in Kabul and the retreat from Kabul in Afghanistan to the British is they get massacred, and there's maybe 20 people left of a 30,000 force. But as you said, that would never happen under a Napoleonic French force, because all of his commanders were people that were maybe not as good as he was, but they're pretty damn close.
Well, there's a universal love for the men, and that's why these men are loved. As we move on, I mean, I don't think there's an engagement where there's not a great story of a marshal riding forward, drawing his saber, whether he's on horseback or whether he's had a horse shot from out underneath him, and just going, God damn it, guys, let's go. And men rally. And that is unheard of. Yeah, in this time period. Borodino is the famous example. I can never remember the marshal's name, but he has his second horse shot out from underneath him. The Cossacks come in, and he takes refuge in an infantry square, and then rallies a Saxon group of hussars and charges the end of what was called at the time the Flesh at Borodino, and takes the Flesh, which was a raised level of earthworks. And they charge 3 times, each time taking devastating losses from cannon, but they take the Russian artillery position. And the marshal stands atop the cannon and says, it congratulates the men, like waving his saber. Like, you don't see this. You don't see this from any other continental army. These men are loved, and their commanders love their commander. And it all starts here in Italy, because this is where the legend is born.
Yep. Well, anyways, we are running to the 50 minutes. So for the next episode, we will do a better job of planning out the content, because we went way too quickly.
Well, I'm just glad Beef Wellington came up. That is the one thing that we can all talk about Wellington positively.
Hey, we can also talk about him positively in a fictional sense, in him hiding Arthur Simerson being probably one of the best moments of the entire show. The "You lost the king's colors" speech is quite possibly one of the best moments of the Sharp series.
It is, and if anybody in chat has not watched them, I strongly encourage you to.
They are all up on YouTube.
If you're not a reader, number one, read the books, because the books are great. They're right up there with the Master and Commander series. With the Jack Aubrey. Jack Aubrey is the naval version of Richard Sharp, and you should read both. But if you're not inclined to read them, by all means, watch them, and they're all on YouTube. So
yes, an exceptional show, and it's probably the only thing Sean Bean has been in where he does not die.
Oh, we actually did this not too long ago on Comic Talk Live. There's a couple of movies, but yeah.
Yeah.
Ronan famously, he does not die, but
Fair enough.
Kicked out of the group.
Anyways, point is, Sharp, great stuff. When we get to the Peninsular War, I am going to be having a field day with Sharp clips. Namely, probably Simerson ones. But I appreciate everyone for coming in here this evening. This has been the first episode of Vivre l'Empereur. I'm Michael Odin. This is my co-host, Aldous. And we will see you next Monday. Don't forget to sign up for the Embrace 2. I'll make sure that the link's in the description. I don't think I did that before the show. Aldous, do you have anything special going on project-wise? I know that you've been doing your Shadow series uploads, which I very much enjoy listening to.
Yeah, I've got episode 122 of The Shadow, the last episode of 1940 from December 29th. The Ghost on the Stair is probably going to be dropped tomorrow.
Awesome.
Otherwise, like and subscribe here to Odin. Odin's doing good stuff. And, I'm not going to say we're trying to do like drunken history or anything like that, but this is important stuff that everybody needs to understand, because so much is born out of what Napoleon represents. And even if you're an armchair guy and you just like hearing about history and hearing about military tactics, this series, if Odin wants to continue it, is going to be fantastic.
Which I do. It's going to be a blast.
When you get into some of what Napoleon did in some of these,
we're going to have to do like an entire episode on Austerlitz. Like we will I'll pull up the Epic History TV episode that they did on it, and we'll just EFAP it.
Oh yeah,
because it's like you really can't, like, Epic History and Kings and Generals both have stellar Napoleonic content. So we can do that, and I'm absolutely happy to continue this.
Yeah, this is an era when there was actually honor on the battlefield, and there was actually pure courage continually being shown, and it's astounding, it's amazing, and the tactics and the development that were being done is
Napoleon was the first official member of the Lonely Island music group. Fun story about Napoleon in terms of that. When he returned from Elba, he had a very small, so Napoleon finds himself exiled from France twice, once after the Russian campaign and once at the very end. When he initially is exiled to Elba, he eventually escapes and he comes back to France, and the English have reinstated the Bourbon monarchy. And so Napoleon arrives in France with a small bodyguard unit, and the Bourbon king, I believe it was another Louis, so he's sending army. He sends an army out to Napoleon to arrest him, and the first army sees Napoleon, stops, salutes him, and screams "Vive l'Empereur!" and they join him. Louis sends another army, and they do the exact same thing. And Napoleon ends up sending a message to Louis being like, "Hey, man, I really appreciate you sending me the soldiers. I need them, but you have to stop. I do not have the food to feed them. Like, I don't have it. Please just wait for me to get to Paris. I'll take the rest then." And at this point in time, Louis packs up his bags and leaves Paris.
Well, before when the army shows up, his bodyguard forms in front of him as the army comes out to meet him, and Napoleon famously pushes his bodyguard aside and opens his coat and says, "Who will be the first? Either kill me or join me," basically. And they join him because why? Because he's loved and
he's adored.
It all starts in this Italian campaign. I think maybe we just need to talk about the Italian campaign next time, and how
Yeah, no, that's the plan. Is like
what
like
he's
we
able
did.
to do with this ramshackle, just
He
disaster of an army, and the military accomplishments that he makes in 18 months
even in
is
his ability to
phenomenal.
prevent them from doing stupid shit too. Like, yeah, there was some ransacking or anything, but nowhere near the level that you would expect given the circumstances. His command and control over those men in the Italian campaign is astonishing. And it's as I said, like that's why I want to next episode we are going to go and plan out the Italian campaign. We'll analyze the best battles from it. And yeah, like that's going to be a blast. We'll coordinate that off panel. But thank you so much, Aldous, for coming out and hanging out with us. We're absolutely going to continue doing this.
For sure.
I love Napoleon. And one of my favorite books that I've read in the past 10 years was Napoleon A Life, which is written by the guy who wrote Master and Commander. Beautiful biography. And yeah, so I'm excited. Thank you to the chat. Thanks to my co-host, and you guys have a good night.
Have a good one, all.